I've talked before about how Dell wound up with a license to some of Famous Funny's best features, so let's close our discussion of 1936 with what Famous Funnies looked like by the end of that year. The format of this anthology has changed a little. The old style of pages of the same strip being spread randomly throughout the book is gone, and there are multiple pages now all consecutive with each other. There is still a tier system by page count, where the most important features get 4 pages. Oddly, there's no 3-page tier at all. And then there's the 2-page and the single-page tier. A far cry from what the newer comic book titles these days look like with their rambling 7-page stories. Buck Rogers is still the star of the book, and Jane Arden still gets 4 pages, but there's a new player in town in the top tier. War on Crime by Rex Collier, I think I'm pronouncing that right, tried to up the game of Dick Tracy by telling the stories of not fictional gangsters, but real-life ones. Rex was a Philadelphia Ledger crime reporter who got to work from actual FBI files. Like many comic book creators who couldn't draw, he looked to book illustrators for work experience and quickly rotated through several. This strip went over like the proverbial gangbusters and launched the true crime genre in comics in May 1936. Easton Color had so much confidence in this new strip that they started reprinting it when there was only 4 months of backstory to choose from and put it right away on the cover. Reprint comic books have now dropped from a several-year gap before reprinting to a several-month gap. The first Public Enemy recounted in the strip is Charles Urschel, a name that probably 99% of the people out there don't remember, including me, and I've read the strips that I'm talking about. But Rex will soon be telling the stories of Ma Barker and Babyface Nelson, names that have stuck in the public consciousness over the last century way better. Speaking of Jane Arden, as I briefly did a minute ago, I have never got around to giving her any time in the spotlight here, and that's a shame because I've always enjoyed Jane Arden. So, who is Jane Arden? You're probably asking. It's hard to believe sometimes how characters once so popular can just completely fall out of the public consciousness. Jane Arden was a comic strip that lasted 40 years. In the US, her popularity peaked in 1938, 1939, when there was a Jane Arden radio show and then a Jane Arden movie. When the syndicated comic strip went international, it got even more popular in Canada and still more popular in Australia, where its popularity seems to have peaked in the 1950s. So, what was special about Jane Arden? Nothing that's going to seem special as I describe it now, because we live in a post-Lois Lane world where we think of Lois Lane as the quintessential plucky reporter who will risk any danger to get her scoop. But before her, that was Jane Arden. All right, it was also Brenda Starr, but before Brenda Starr, it was Jane Arden. And she didn't have a Superman to save her either. Now, to be fair, there were plenty of stories where a man saves or helps Jane Arden save herself, but there were also plenty of stories where one didn't. And Jane Arden was always the star of her own stories. There are actually 3 different story arcs that I've encountered in Jane Arden stories. One is the adventure story, where Jane is investigating something, whether it's some corrupt politician or the circus coming to town, and then things get dangerous, and Jane has to swing out of an upstairs window to escape, or ride to the rescue on an elephant, or something equally adventurous. The second story arc is soap opera, where Jane gets kind of close to finding romance, but then doesn't because this is still the 1930s, and you can't have a career and family. This story may have comic overtones, like Jane meeting a man who's actually a royal prince, and he likes her, but she thinks that he's someone else and someone else is the prince, and so they never get together. The third type of story is the competitive story with a jealous rival. All 3 of these stories can overlap, like a jealous rival tricking Jane into missing the train that a man that they're both interested in is going on while on their way to their next adventure. So, Between these three story arcs, I feel that Jane Arden stays very fresh, um, and it's always fun for me to go back and read an early heroine from a time when we don't think that women were treated very well, but we can see that despite, in the real world, how few rights they had, for entertainment value at least, we treated them equal to the male heroes. So that's some comfort, right? Unlike Buck Rogers and War on Crime, which I never really enjoyed as much and I don't think hold up as well today, Jane Arden was written by Monte Barrett, the pen name of Percy Barrett, using a variation on his middle name. In addition to being a newspaperman, Barrett wrote at least 5 novels in the 30s and 40s, one of them being the basis of the Adventures of Jim Bowie TV series in the 1950s, which I've never seen or even heard of before, but hopefully it was good. He went through a bunch of artists on Jane Arden, sort of like War on Crime cycled through a lot. Jane was co-created by Frank Ellis, but Ellis stayed on the strip for just the first 5 years. Bear in mind that Jane Arden has a deep backlog, so even though we're here in 1936, the strip goes back many, many years. By the strips reprinted in comic books, the strip was already on its third artist, Jack McGuire. Each artist was made to draw in the same style, though McGuire, I feel, was better on background detail than any of the earlier Ellis strips I've seen. There's additional strips that are new to Famous Funnies that we probably could go over now, like Dickie Dare, which is a strip that I really like, and we're for sure going to do a Dickie Dare spotlight episode in the future. And also Adventures of Patsy, which is significant for being the first comic strip with a magician lead other than Mandrake the Magician. And we'll probably talk about that in the future too. But I've got lots of Famous Funnies to talk about in the future, so let's kind of spread it out and not hit too much all at one time. And that's where we're going to leave for today. Next time, we're going to talk about wrapping up 1936 and summarizing everything that's come so far. So I think that'll be fun. And then on to 1937. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. It's obviously later now. I'm working in post-production, looking at my own videos and thinking that what was going on? I seem to be watching myself in a sleepwalk where I'm just reading my notes to you instead of really talking to you. And I wonder just how much of the day I spend like this. It's been really rough, I think, for many of us since the election and our nation's hard, disastrous shift into fascism. And it's difficult to talk about comic books from 80 years ago and feel like I'm doing something that's productive of my time. But I think this will prove to be important. I think that as we all struggle to deal with the new realities of life, it's going to be useful to look back at a time when right and wrong, good and evil were very clear cut and easily solved within a few pages. And hopefully we'll find some measure of moral compass through that. I think that is one of the great values of comic books. Maybe it's not realistic. Maybe real life isn't like that. But like in Men of La Mancha, better to... Oh, I'm going to get this quote wrong, aren't I?
And maddest of all, to see life as it is and not as it should be.
There we go. So, I hope that you get through this video okay, and that you get through your day okay, like Lois back there is doing. And I will see you for our next video. Bye again.